And we are back, episode 447, Iron Fist and Velvet Glove podcast. Joe the Tech Guy's here. How are you, Joe?
I'm good. Evening all.
Yeah, Scott will be joining us soon. Apparently he voted today. He's a little bit late. Be interesting to see who he voted for.
I don't know that the two are related, but certainly...
Yes. If you're in the chat room, say hello. Don Tuvey is there. Good on you, Don. So, and yes, you
Can't
are the
get rid
first. Yeah. So, what's on the agenda? We're going to review a little bit about my special episode I did last week on the Notebook LM, and a little bit about the Queensland state election, which is coming up. So, issue of abortion and free school lunches. I received a letter from the ACL about the dangers facing us if other incorrect decisions are made.
Is the danger that people might not have to live by their interpretation of the Bible?
Dark times, Joe, is the danger. It's all Orwellian, dark, biblical type talk. Just to quote from it, a dystopian nightmare is facing us.
Oh, no.
Yes. So that's the sort of language that was used in it. There's a radical anti-faith, anti-life agenda, which is metastasizing with disturbing speed in the absence of public scrutiny.
It's almost like there isn't a politician, there hasn't been a prime minister in the last 20 years who hasn't been a practicing Christian.
Yeah. Well, they're persecuted, Joe.
Yeah, I know.
That's that motivation complex we're fond of.
Mm-hmm.
A little update on what's been happening with voluntary assisted dying. Catholics are worried because there's a new bill aimed at abolishing misinformation.
Oh, yeah.
And they're worried that might limit their activities. Because
their ability to lie to their parishioners. Oh, no.
Shock horror, some people might consider religion to be misinformation. So,
yes.
they, of course, Joe, need special exemptions because of the concern about that. So that's a fun one to talk about. Oh, what else have we got?
Well, they want the ability to lie about children getting sex changes at school.
Yes. So we'll talk about that. And then a bunch of different videos, a little bit about Trump, because he's just completely off the scale crazy.
Another nickname for him, Agent Orange.
Indeed. Joe, did you keep track of what happened with the UK opposition with their leadership ballot?
No.
Oh, well, we'll talk about
the Conservatives?
That. Yes.
Yeah, I heard something about there was going to be a black woman versus a white man, and people went, yeah, the Conservatives are never going to vote for a black woman.
Yeah. There was a favourite, and some of the favourites' supporters tried to game the system by not voting for their man and voting for their second best option in order to get rid of the third best option. And that backfired on them. And the guy who was leading the ballot completely disappeared because too many of his supporters tried to game the system. So we'll talk about that, which is an interesting one.
Tell me, was that a lettuce in the running by any chance?
What, a lettuce? No, well, yeah, it was actually... who was it?
Actually, talking about the lettuce, she was over here giving a talk to the Australian Fascist Party or whatever it was.
Yeah, she was. Hey, that looks like Scott's here. We'll put him on.
Ah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Scott.
Hello.
G'day, how are you?
Very good. We've just said hello to the listeners and run through the agenda, but we haven't discussed anything of importance yet. So
Oh, that's good.
you haven't missed anything, Scott.
Excellent.
I hear you voted today.
Yes, I did vote this afternoon.
Vote one, Greens?
No. I voted one for the legalised cannabis Queensland party.
Yep. Can you move the microphone slightly closer because you're a little bit soft?
How's that?
That's better. Yep.
I voted for the what was I saying? The legalized cannabis Queensland Party. They got my first preference. The second preference went to the Labor Party. The third preference went to the LNP. The fourth preference went to the Greens. Fifth preference went to One Nation, and sixth preference went to Family First.
Is there a Katter candidate in your?
No, there's no Katter candidate up here, which is really quite surprising. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about issues related to the Queensland election. Sorry for everybody outside of Queensland, but let's talk about it because.
But you'll get over it.
Yeah, we're considered sort of backward hicks up here, but
yeah, we are,
we are, but. We have, other than the period of Joe Bjelke-Petersen with this crazy group, there's been a lot of Labor governments in this state over time. And we've had one that's been there for roughly 10 years or something like that, I think, Scott.
Yeah, thereabouts.
And it's looking like they're in trouble and are probably going to be deposed. But there's not been a lot of polls about it, but it seems... it seems like they're going to lose. But a couple of issues have come up, one of which is abortion. So, of course, the last time Queensland voted in the parliament on abortion and whether it should be legalised, a significant number of LNP politicians who are still around voted against it. And
they were given a conscience vote, yes.
Yes, and chose to vote against it. And
I believe only 2 voted for it.
There you go. Was it only 2?
Apparently only 2. Okay, maybe it was 3.
3 voted for it.
Sake. Yeah. So
and those were the same 3 that voted for voluntary assisted dying too.
So although Blahey has said he's not Blahey, who's the current
Crisafulli
has said that he has no intention of criminalising abortion.
Yeah. As soon as the Katter, if they get within a hair's breadth of taking government and Bob Katter's kid comes knocking at the door saying, you recriminalise abortion, I will guarantee supply and confidence, that's where it'll go.
Well, but they've also said if Katter puts up a private member's bill and the Conservatives have control, if the LNP have control, the vast majority of LNP members will vote to recriminalise it.
Which will just highlight to all the people who forgot what a crazy
what a bunch of
Christian fascist
are.
Nutbags these guys are. And
I actually said to the LNP guy up here, I said to him again this afternoon because he said, recognised me. He says, I've met you before. I said, yeah, I met you at Parkrun a couple of weeks ago. And he said, oh, you're the bloke that's got concerns about the front bench. I said, yes, I do. And I actually I lent on something Joe was always saying. He says, well, the biggest problem is the Christian theocrats that are on your front bench. Jared Blay and all that sort of stuff are nutbags. And I said, that's why, I'm very sorry, sir, but you're not going to get my vote.
So yeah, abortion has become an issue, which just seems incredible that we just revisit this. But also a policy that came out, well, and allied to that was the fact that they might need the Katter sort of members to sort of form a government, in which case he'll definitely be putting pressure on for abortion to be revisited and possibly voluntary assisted dying to be revisited. But what did you think of the proposal by Labor, if elected, to provide school lunches free for all state school primary kids? Joe and Scott, what do you think of that one?
If there are figures that show that it's warranted, that it is a real problem, I don't have a problem with it. I know that in other parts of the world that providing nutrition for the kids is a key part of state schools.
Well, that's what Britain did.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure in Japan I've seen scenes of kids getting their meals in a group setting, sort of cafeteria style in Japan. So,
well, the United States has school lunches. Britain has school lunches. So, yeah, I know that Britain.
I mean, in France is a canteen. And up until the 60s, I think, in secondary school, they were still allowed 2 glasses of wine at lunch. And it was only in the 40s that it was banned from primary schools.
Really?
Yeah. I only found that out this year.
High school, France.
Yeah, high school France was it was in my lifetime, and the primary schools, it was sort of only after the Second World War that they stopped it.
Wow.
Because basically drinking water wasn't safe, and therefore you could have up to half a litre of wine a day, I think.
Yeah.
Deemed, safe for drinking.
Yeah. So I reckon this could be a real vote winner, because I just know for a lot of parents, making lunches every day is
a pain.
It's a pain in the ass. So
yeah, but 40% of parents send their kids to private school anyway.
Yeah, well, you know what? There'll be a big driver of private school kids going to state schools, because these parents will just go, God, if I can't
be bothered to make school lunches.
If I can get out of making school lunches, I'm going to send my kid to the local state school. Like, it will be a big winner for people. So, Anne Reid in the chat room says, I heard today the school principals aren't happy about it. I think I was reading on some Facebook page that involved Alison Cortis that running a tuck shop is a big responsibility that a lot of P&Cs have basically thrown their hands up and said, we don't want to do it. And it's sort of one of those things that has prevented people from, becoming treasurers and presidents of P&Cs, the onerous duty of running the tuck shop and finding volunteers. And so a fair number of P&Cs have handed the operation back to the school, and the schools have had to run it. So if that's a trend that's going on, that schools are having to take over these things, and it's not surprising with more and more people where both husband and wife, or wife and husband are working, it's sort of just less and less people available for volunteering in these things. So it probably is.
Well, hopefully the budget comes with dinner ladies.
Dinner ladies?
Yeah, dinner ladies. That's what they were known as at school.
That's what they were known as in Britain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dinner ladies.
The ladies who were running the cafeteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were probably employed, were they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's one of those things, like our tuck shop's run by paid staff. That's possibly a reflection of the Catholic school, but
right.
It is. Yeah.
You know what's going to happen, of course, is the private schools are going to say, well, where's our handout?
Yeah,
we're running.
Oh, but hang on. This is a state initiative, and private schools are federal, so it's a federal problem.
Yeah, but you know what they're going to say? They're going to be putting their hands out and saying, well, we pay our taxes. If you're going to be subsidising state school kids, then you need to be subsidising us as well, is what they're going to be doing, and looking for the handout. So, yeah. So Anne in the chat room said she heard today the school principals aren't happy about it, and the crux of this conversation was about how to cater for all the different needs, e.g. Asian, halal, etc.
It's dealt with in France. It's dealt with in the UK. I'm sure there are ways around it. Generally, there's a choice. It's not a single food. It's a choice of.
So, anyway,
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting proposal.
Talking of proposals, I looked at I've only got 3 possible candidates, so LNP, Greens and Labour.
Right.
So I looked at their websites. Labour is woeful. They just point you off to a 190-page document or something saying, here is our state party policy. Here you go. Go your hardest.
That's what the Labour candidate in your state electorate.
Yeah. So I looked on the website at the candidate, and all I could find was, here's our policy document.
Wow.
It was woeful. The LNP have a whole load of ideas about how they're going to fix everything, basically by giving money to private enterprise in the hope that maybe some of it will trickle down to public people. So they are going to fix the high price of groceries by ensuring that there's lots of water for farmers. Because most people's grocery bills are inflated by the cost of water to the farmer and not by the supermarkets.
Right.
So the Greens are going to take on the supermarket by stopping them from insisting that there are no other supermarkets in the same shopping centre.
Right.
And a couple of other things.
Yes.
They're talking about
because
giving
they
money.
sometimes would sign a deal saying we'll be part of the shopping centre provided we're the exclusive supermarket. Yeah. Yep.
They were talking about, so the Liberals were going to give money. They were going to reduce red tape to allow people to build more houses.
Yes,
so in other words,
red tape's the problem. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think give money to private developers.
Yeah.
And also they're going to cut the first home buyers stamp duty, which of course will just force the prices of houses up.
By the amount of the cut, yes.
Whereas the Greens were talking about increasing the number of builders in queue build and building 100,000 state-owned, state-built homes.
Champion idea.
Well, exactly. So
that's assuming you can actually find the tradies to work in queue build.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they're saying, it's a secure job until LNP get back in again anyway.
Right. Okay.
So basically the Greens were talking about they were also talking about renationalising, I think, the electricity grid.
Right.
But basically it was a lot more state infrastructure and reduce the reliance on private enterprise. I think they were also talking about toll roads.
As in introducing more?
No. I think basically making them free, but also talking about increasing public transport.
Right. Yep.
They're saying that effectively public-private partnerships, as they are, just make private enterprises very rich at the cost of the average taxpayer. Apparently
the 50-cent public transport fare experiment is going to be continued no matter whether it's Labor or LNP, I think I read.
That's what the whole crux of it was. The LNP matched them on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have that in Mackay? Is it?
Yeah, we got it up there, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's only 50 cents, but we don't have card readers on our buses. So you actually have to hand over cash.
Right. So anyway, I mean, there's some biggish ideas. I mean, the 50-cent transport is quite a significant policy. Free school
it is quite
lunches.
significant. It's not a very bad idea. It's probably a very good idea if you could get the price of public transport down so that more people are actually catching a bus rather than driving.
I've never seen the point of charging. If you're going to put on the public transport, put on the public transport, don't charge. Because the cost of all of that billing infrastructure, how much of that 50 cents do you think goes to the cost of the card readers?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to know what the,
If you just run it as a loss, rather than try and claw some of that money back, would it actually be cheaper to run?
But you know what? You probably need it just for information gathering, almost.
I'm sure there are other ways.
I suppose there is. You could just have a person counter
on the door. I know the police
wouldn't
be happy because they love being able to go to the go-kart and go, who was here at this time?
Yeah, but just seeing what trips people make, when they get on, when they get off, is probably just valuable data to get from people. And
they used to employ people to sit on the train with high-vis gear and a clipboard and mark how many people got on and off at each station.
How long ago did they do that, Joe?
Probably 10 years ago.
Okay. So anyway, anything else from the... Oh, yes. For some reason, I'm on the Australian Christian Lobby mailing list.
And what did you do to deserve that?
Actually, I forgot to actually send a because I'm on the Cherish Life mailing list.
I'm on the binary mailing list.
Right. Well, I always share everything that Cherish Life sends me. I always send to Craig and says, it's more of their bullshit and that sort of stuff. I forgot to send in the latest one. That was they were seeking for volunteers to hand out anti-abortion leaflets on election day.
Right.
Yeah, which means they're very firmly in the Qatar Australia Party camp and that type of thing.
So anyway, the letter I got from the Australian Christian Lobby, I'll read a bit of it. Dear Trevor, on October 26th, Queenslanders will vote in a defining election amidst the gathering clouds of a repressive, woke policy agenda threatening to black out our Christian voice in the public square and shroud our state in moral darkness. The radical anti-faith, anti-life agenda is metastasising with disturbing speed and absence of public scrutiny, and left unchecked would cast a pall over everything that makes Queensland great. That's the opening paragraph.
Fair enough.
Under cover of night on 13 September, Labor and the Greens ran through the most oppressive hate speech laws in the nation. The Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment Bill has armed unelected bureaucrats with sweeping powers to stifle fair debate and persecute people of faith. This is a dystopian nightmare come true. 2.5 million Queenslanders who identify as Christian now must live under the constant threat of activists weaponising these Orwellian laws to silence us. We cannot allow this depraved moral eclipse to darken the Sunshine State. It goes on and on and on, and towards the end, the stakes couldn't be higher, but armed with God's word as our lamp and his truth as our anchor, we step forward with confidence and resolve, knowing that his light radiates through us. Rob Norman, current Queensland Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Well, it's painting
Quite
a scene.
Dystopian, wasn't it?
He forgot to sign off under his eye.
Yeah.
Well, he's really painting a scene out of Lord of the Rings as the armies start marching out of Mordor. And,
obviously, oh God, what's his name? The Labor leader.
Stephen Miles.
Stephen Miles is Sauron, apparently.
So, you know what I should do is I should take that letter and run it through Notebook LM and ask it to generate a fake podcast and see what it comes up with. I got good. Well, you guys probably don't even listen to the audio only, but neither of you listened to it, did you?
I did listen to it.
Oh,
yeah.
did you? All right.
I listen to everything.
I have enough problems with LLM, so I don't need another one.
Yeah. So yeah, last week, dear listener, as most of you should know, I had that little essay on foreign policy, which I then handed over to Notebook LM, and it provided an audio podcast of two fake people discussing it. And my little brief mention of what might happen to Israel dominated their thoughts and sort of scared the bejesus out of them, and they spent a lot of time talking about that. And this podcast from last week generated quite a lot of feedback, more feedback than I've had in ages. So I always get feedback from Watley. Thank you, Watley. And this time I got feedback from Damon, who said, "What a fascinating episode. I had not heard of LM before. The previous episode when he mentioned it would be coming up. The generated podcast seemed to narrate/editorialise your essay for the first half, then went off-piste into what I would call hope-washing your scenario. By that I mean it seemed like the podcast decided that your predictions of global instability following a US crisis/collapse needed to be countered with warm and fuzzy, hopeful motherhood statements about global cooperation to soothe the pain of a mere suggestion the US could falter." I agree, Damon. That's exactly what that was. It was the warm and fuzzy, hopeful motherhood statements. Noel gave some feedback. he said it was enlightening and the stark contrast between my reading and the AI-generated version was alarming and the right-wing bias was very clear. And Scott also wrote saying it was interesting and he said it was crazy how much they sounded like real people for the most part. It makes me think some of the phone calls I've suspected were AI, were definitely AI. I didn't realise how advanced it's become. So, yeah. And Noisy Andrew also provided some feedback. Thank you to those people who provided feedback. It's nice to know.
It's worth mentioning that AI in quotes, which are basically large language models, literally are predictive text times 100. They don't know anything. All they do is say, based on what I've been trained on, what is the most likely word to follow the previous word? So they're just statistical models.
Yes.
And it's worth bearing that in mind whenever you come across one. There was a lawyer who recently was admonished by the judge and referred off to the bench for investigation for submitting a
brief of evidence or something. Yeah,
a brief of evidence.
Or, no, it would have been an argument which quoted cases, yes.
Yeah, I think the judge had asked for a list of cases that were relevant and provided this list of cases which had been generated by AI and had not been checked. And of course, none of them existed.
Which Joe, if this is set up to provide the most predictive response based on other responses, how does it hallucinate and make stuff up? Because wouldn't it be saying, oh, well, if anyone's talking about the case of Donahue versus Stevenson, they're probably going to be talking about these other three cases as the most likely things. But I just don't understand how it makes up stuff out of the blue if that's how it's been designed.
Because it knows what a suitable case would look like, but it doesn't actually have the real cases in its memory. It just knows what it should look like.
Okay. So it doesn't have the conscience to say, I shouldn't be lying here.
No.
Right.
So I asked it, I've got running one on my computer, and asked it for successful examples of where privatising government assets has been beneficial for taxpayers. And it reeled off 4 or 5 examples, 2 of which was water privatisation in the UK and was the rail privatisation in the UK.
Right. Water privatisation in the UK was an example of successful privatisation.
Yes.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So I challenged it on that, and it went, well, yeah, I suppose without the proper guardrails, then it's not such a great idea. I challenged it again, and it said, well, I can see how you think that privatisation is just a way of transferring money into private hands. And yes, it's probably not a good idea unless there is some very, very stringent guidance around it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't even have the courage of its convictions.
Yeah. The more I think of it, the more I am going to I'm going to give it that letter from the ACL and ask it to generate a podcast and probably whack it onto the end of this one.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's been trained with American data, whether it's very, very Christian.
Yeah. So we'll see. So, okay. For a bit of fun, that might appear at the end of the episode. Not sure. Alison has joined the chat room. Alison, I was talking about you earlier, Alison. And I think you had a hypothesis that a number of schools had handed over tuck shops. Well, PNCs had handed over tuck shop operation back to the schools because it's just too hard and nobody wants to do it. And, so I quoted you. Tell me if I'm wrong in the chat room or any other thoughts you've got on school tuck shops and the Labor proposal, which was stolen from the Greens, by the way, Scott. The free lunch was a Greens proposal last election.
It's fine.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one of those things I've often said. Greens turn red faster than a frog in a blender, which is just what I would just like them to make the ALP just a little bit more pink.
Alison says, yep, our school did it 2 years ago. We just have the uniform shop for the PNC. There you go. Interesting. Right. So that was Queensland election. still kind of on the election because voluntary assisted dying might come up if Katter has his way. And
the Katter mob actually opposed to that or not?
I suspect they are.
Yeah.
But there's probably a fair number of the LNP who are opposed to it. Anyway,
there are, but there were fewer of them that were opposed to it when they actually had the conscience vote on it.
Right.
Because it did pass with quite a big thumping majority.
Okay, it was safer than the abortion law stuff.
Yeah, it was safer than abortion.
Yeah. So there's been a report on voluntary assisted dying that's looked at all of the various states and come up with some statistics, bearing in mind that the different states introduced voluntary assisted dying at different times. So Victoria was way back in June 2019, whereas Queensland was only as recent as January 2023. So kind of a 4 or 5 year period, but not all states have been operating the system for that long. And sort of Australia-wide, 2,467 deaths in that period. So 56% male. Cancer as the primary diagnosis was 72% of the cases. And 79% of those people had accessed palliative care. And as to whether people did it themselves or required a practitioner to do it for them, 51% were done self and 49% by a practitioner. So not huge numbers, 2,500. So it's obviously not an epidemic of people using the system, but there we go.
It's one of those things. My understanding is that a hell of a lot of people still die of natural causes. Well, just allow the disease to take its course, but they just want the drugs there just in case they change their mind.
Yes, yeah. Interesting. There's a state breakdown. So Victoria's had it since 2019. Total number of deaths 912.
Yeah.
Queensland's only had it since January 2023 and 808 deaths. So,
yeah, but if you look at the number of applicants, the number of applicants are almost the same between the two states.
Yes.
So I think a lot of Queenslanders, a lot of people come up here to retire, don't they?
That's true. We do have, yes, increasingly so. Good point, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Elderly population, yes. That's actually part of the problem for the Miles Labor government is just the migration from Victoria of old boomers who vote conservatively,
the death tax,
and who are really pissed with Dan Andrews, and so the last thing they want is a Labor government. So yeah, I was reading Ross Fitzgerald talking somewhere about that, saying that the interstate migration into Queensland would most likely not have helped Stephen Miles and Labor, just by the nature of the people who are moving up here. Bloody Mexicans. Yeah. That's
446 died in WA.
Yeah. So anyway, there is a report out if you are interested in that. You know, the next thing really that voluntary assisted dying has to sort of hopefully deal with is dementia. Because currently, if you fall foul of dementia, then you've lost your decision-making capacity, and voluntary assisted dying is not open to you.
Is it voluntary at that point, or is it euthanasia?
Yeah. So what we need next, the next challenge is an ironclad system where you can say, if I reach a level of dementia of X amount, then I want someone to kill me. I'd be signing up for that. The thought of existing with dementia for 5, 6, 10 years It'd just be awful, wouldn't it?
Well, you wouldn't know.
It's one of those things. Both my auntie and uncle died from it. And they both had different types of dementia. My auntie had a very slow-acting dementia, whereas my uncle, he went downhill really very quickly. And the octogenarian that met them both, well, the octogenarian doctor that met them both and that sort of stuff, he actually said, look, you got to get him into care.
Gerontologist.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Met them both. He said, you've got to get them both into care. And they found a double room in Gayndah, which is up where one of their daughters lives and that sort of stuff. So they moved up to Gayndah. And unfortunately, my auntie, with dementia and that sort of stuff, once you get it really badly, you go one or two ways. You either become nice and passive or you become an absolute bitch. She became an absolute bitch. And they moved her into this double room and all that sort of stuff. Barely a month later, they moved him out into his own room, and they, and then he just after she died and all that sort of stuff, he kept on going back to her room saying, "Where's Dot?" And they said, "Oh, Dot's no longer here. She's died." It's just one of those things, and I think he died sort of 6 or 9 months later.
I mean, I'd much rather that than locked-in syndrome.
Oh God, yeah, that'd be awful.
Yeah. Yes. To be completely lucid but unable to do anything about it would be 1,000 times worse than being completely doolally and not knowing.
Exactly. If you are completely mental and that sort of stuff, that if you're not a bastard or anything else, if you completely lost it, you're in your own little world. You don't know what's going on.
Dementia is like being an LNP supporter. It's only the people around you who suffer.
Yeah, I know that. Exactly. It's one of those things. I remember years ago I saw an advertisement on a bus. There was an old lady sitting in a chair and that sort of stuff. They said she has dementia. They all suffer from it. And that was her family that was around her.
Mind you, as people slip into dementia and realise where they're heading and knowing what's ahead, but it's too late to do anything, I have seen people in that position.
Yeah.
And yes. So
okay.
Whether they're
because I was being forgetful and I said to a GP friend of mine, "Oh, I must be having dementia." And they went, "No, the first sign of dementia is where you forget things and then you make up excuses as to why they're not where you expect them to be." So all the time you're going, "Oh shit, I've forgotten where this is," you haven't got it. But the time, and I wonder really with Mum hallucinating, how much of her hallucinations are her justifying not remembering things. So yeah, she has an Indian family living in her room. Her hallucinations, and the kids are writing things on her books that are very obviously in her handwriting.
Right.
And I'm wondering whether she's just not remembering it. And yes, she is seeing these hallucinations, but she's justifying her loss of memory with, it must have been my hallucinations that did this.
Did he describe it as a justification for the loss?
Yes.
Right. Or just as an alternative explanation? Right. Yeah. Okay.
Basically, I didn't forget where my car keys are. Somebody must have moved them.
Interesting. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, my wife and I, we've lost both of our parents now, but we've been through lots of that stuff, and we have other friends now who are entering that stage, and we just go, been there, done that, and you have my sympathy. It's not easy. So
no,
yeah,
it's not at all easy.
No.
Right. What else have I got here? Sort of related to that would be, well, not related to that, Catholics and misinformation. So the federal government is not happy with misinformation and disinformation on social media, so has drafted a bill to combat this, a misinformation bill, to make it illegal, and the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference said, hold on a minute. Some people consider elements of religious belief to be misinformation. Actually,
it is basically misinformation.
Yes. So they are concerned that their activities, if promoted on social media, would be fall foul of this law for spreading misinformation or disinformation. So they were up in arms. The government changed it and inserted the word reasonable, but the bishops aren't happy because there's now a question of what is a reasonable religious belief. So yeah, I had a quick look at the draft bill. I think I saw the latest version, and it said the meaning of misinformation and disinformation, content that contains information that is reasonably verifiable as false, misleading, or deceptive. And the content is provided on the digital service to one or more end users in Australia, and the provision of the content is reasonably likely to cause or contribute to serious harm, and the dissemination is not excluded dissemination. So it's looking at content that is reasonably verifiable as false, misleading, or deceptive, that is provided on a digital service and is reasonably likely to cause harm. Excluded dissemination. And if you look at the definition of excluded dissemination, information that would be regarded as parody or satire, professional news content, and reasonable dissemination of content for any academic, artistic, scientific, or religious purpose. So, of course, once again, religious groups get a special exemption from laws that apply to everybody else because they're special and they're religious. So if it's a reasonable dissemination of content for a religious purpose, then it is going to be exempt from that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think if you're lying about abortion causing breast cancer, that's not a religious belief.
No.
And I think that is more around where the misinformation and disinformation. If you're going, we believe that if you do that, you're going to hell, well, that's a religious belief.
How embarrassing that you have to have a special exemption in an act because your creed is misinformation. But there we go.
That's it's only because you bloody atheists haven't seen the light.
Yes.
To any reasonable person, it's obvious that God exists, and it's not misinformation at all.
Yeah. So anyway, we're safe here as we're kind of a professional news dissemination of professional news content, maybe. Anyway, that's what's going on there. And before I forget, just briefly, AUKUS. Remember, I did an interview with Cameron Leckie. He has done a petition with the federal government saying that the Australian people were never asked if they wanted a new $368 billion nuclear submarine deal with the USA and the UK. This deal not only undermines Australia's sovereignty but creates a more dangerous world. Consensus says that most Australian citizens are against it and see it as a waste of money that could be used elsewhere. And the petitioner's request, we therefore ask the House to cancel the AUKUS agreement immediately. So,
it's closed.
Is it closed already, is it?
Yeah, on the 9th of October, 2024.
That's why I'm being so slack. Sorry, Cameron. There was a petition. I signed it. See what happens with that one. Thank you.
It's only got 1,535 signatures.
Right. That's not many, is it?
No.
Speaking of not many, patrons to this podcast and listeners. Hey, thank you to the patrons. I have been forgetting to mention, and I've been thanking patrons, a friend of the show, local identity here at The Gap, Lee, who provides my family with a regular supply of free sourdough. Good on you, Lee. So you can be a patron via Patreon, or you can make donations via PayPal, or you can drop sourdough around regularly like Lee does. What's that?
You can contribute by Trevor's stomach.
That's it. So, look, the good news is nobody has quit as a patron since April 2022. That's pretty good. The bad news is that only 6 have joined since that time. Over 2 years. Come on,
So
guys.
we haven't pissed enough people off, is what you're saying.
So thank you. From the newest to the oldest, from the most recent to the to people who've been with us over 6 years now. Thank you, Noel Hamilton, Paige, Damien Van Schneidel, Danny Borland, Obrad Puskarica, Noisy Andrew, Mark Lavelle, Tom Stubbings, Rico, Greg P, Shannon Legg, Matt Dwyer, Sue Cripp, James, Leanne, James, I've got to find out how to pronounce your name at some point. Wayne, Virgil, Craig Ball, Shane Ingram, Yam Yam Blue, Zambuck, David Copley, John in Dire Straits is in the chat room, Camille, Paul Waper, Alexander Allen, Matthew, Craig S, Glenn Bell, Professor Dr. Dentist, Murray Waper, Peter Gillespie, Gavin S, Daniel Curtin, Liam McMahon, who won't be happy with your voting today, Scott. Anyway,
that's fine. I realise I'm going to upset a few of our listeners, but yes, I have got some very valid reasons for not backing them.
Yes. Dom282. That would be Dom. Is that the Dom?
No.
Maddock Man, Kane Birch, Jimmy Spud, Tony Wall, Steve Shinners, Alison, who is in the chat room, Ayame, Wayno, Craig, and Janelle Louise. And people who have helped us via PayPal or whatever over time has been Mr. T, Anne Reid, who was in the chat room, and Dave S from Cairns. So that's around about 50 people, which is an excellent percentage given that, for example, the episode 446 was only listened to by 148 people. So nearly a third of the people who listen to this podcast are contributors. That is a high percentage. Thank you for that. Just be nicer if there were more people listening. But anyway, you can't have everything, can you?
Stop needing to be so offensive.
Yeah. I think the algorithms are going to work against me. But, you know, maybe, dear listener, tell your friends about the show. A bit of word of mouth. Right. So, Scott, we just mentioned, I think before you arrived, UK opposition, the Conservatives. Have you been keeping tabs of them at all?
I've got no idea who's going to lead them now that, what's his name, stepped down.
Well, there were 3 in the race. There was a guy, James Cleverly, who was the number 1 favourite candidate. And there were 2 others, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. Kemi Badenoch, Kemi being a black woman. And it seems they then had to do a vote to reduce it to 2. And the people who really liked James Cleverly, many of them did not like Kemi Badenoch. So instead of voting for James only, they voted for, how did they do this? They wanted to make sure that Kemi didn't get into the final 2. So instead of voting for their man James, they voted for Robert. And unfortunately for them, not enough of them voted for James. And it ended up that the second and third candidates came through because James's group stupidly tried to game the system, despite apparently James's group, James Cleverly's sort of whips and counters and everything, told people, do not game the system. We need every vote. Do not try and be clever about this. Just don't do it. And these stupid old Conservative guys thought, oh, I know what I'm doing. And they mucked it up. And their man was knocked out. And so he was a slightly more moderate character. And now they've just faced with 2 very rightish people as their options. So that's what happened in the UK with the Conservative Party there.
That's why you got to have That's why you've got to have a preferential vote in everything that you do.
Mm. And apparently, because it was such small numbers, there's not that many MPs to vote.
No.
It gets riskier and riskier to try and game the system. So, yeah. Right. Do you guys have anything in particular you want to talk about?
I've covered off the elections.
What's that?
I said I've covered off the elections.
Yes, with your
in
state
terms
candidate.
of, if you want to actually talk about it, there was a guy that was arrested today near a Trump rally that was armed.
Oh, yes.
They don't know whether or not it was a third assassination attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but, he's flagging dangerously behind Kamala, so I wouldn't. Sorry, Kamala.
Kamala.
Yeah. It's pronounced Carmel.
I thought it was like Pamela, but Kamala.
No, Kamala.
Okay.
Listening to the various people pronounce her name and taking the piss out of Trump.
He, by the way, in case you didn't know it, he really hates immigrants.
I know he hates migrants. Absolutely, he does.
Yes. Here he is talking about them. I've got him at one of his rallies.
You cannot get into a hospital, by the way, because the migrants have all of the beds. You cannot get into a hospital. You cannot get your kids into a school because there are migrants there that don't even speak the language. It's unbelievable. They're giving, because of Biden and Kamala, they're giving precedence over your children who've been in that school.
Yeah.
He's a nut.
He's
an old man who's completely lost the plot. I mean, he was never rational. He was always a shyster.
Yeah.
He's now lost the plot. There's been comments. He's apparently in a number of speeches recently been complaining about flies. And I wondered whether he was hallucinating them. But no, there's also been clips of him passing gas on the stage. It sounds like it's only recently been noticed that his personal physician, who had been around since the 1980s, who wrote this wonderful eulogy of how great a president he was going to be in 2015, had that dictated over the phone to him by Trump. And then Trump's bodyguards broke in and stole Trump's personal records from him later on.
Right.
Apparently he's a gastroenterologist.
Right. His personal physician.
So it suggested that actually Trump may well have serious bowel problems and has been for a long time.
The flies could be because he's soiling his pants on stage.
Which is the rumours that have been going around for a long time anyway. But
and if it was anybody else, you would feel very sorry for them. But just for that asshole, it's...
Well, I mean, given the way that he laughs about other people who are disabled in any way, shape or form, yes.
I can't get how the minorities over there are willing to vote for him. The Latinos and the blacks.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. This is his
you really need that Batman clip where he breaks in and plays he's recorded, is it the Joker, laughing at all those suckers who voted for him. And yeah, basically we need somebody to have caught Trump laughing at all those suckers who voted for him, because he does apparently laugh at them. But we need to be able to play that on air.
In the chat room, Alison says 2 out of his 3 wives are migrants.
Well, exactly.
And Don says, well, he's been giving us the shits for years. Here's an example of one of the guys doing the warm-up at one of his rallies, which is a black man. And just this is the sort of stuff that you'd get in North Korea for the great leader, and we would all be laughing at it. But this is modern-day America for you.
President Donald Trump is the master of his fate. He is the captain of his soul. And with you, my brave fellow Americans, we will make him our 47th president. I've had the honor and the privilege of traveling with the president today,
Is that
and I'm here to
started
tell
yet?
you he wants to fight for you
you
every
can't hear it,
single
Scott?
step of the way.
No, I can't hear it or see it.
But you heard the other one, Scott.
Yeah, I heard the other one.
I don't know why you wouldn't hear that one.
Sometimes it does this.
All right.
Anyway, he's going to be totally shocked when he finds out that a whole bunch of Trump supporters are calling him that N-word in tweets, because they will be.
Of course they will be.
Because over and over, I mean, J.D. Vance was so shocked that Republicans were going on about his Indian wife and how racist they were about her.
I cannot understand that because, this is a bloke who's married to an Indian lady and all that sort of stuff. She's a Hindu. And what was the first thing they all said? They said, oh, he can't be very serious if he's not got a Christian wife, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Anyway, Trump supporters are pretty clever because there was that Hurricane Milton that was bearing down on Florida and fortunately didn't cross as a Category 5. It had decreased to a Category 3 or something by the time it got there. But a lot of Trump supporters, well, here's an example of a Trump supporter who felt that dark forces opposed to Donald Trump, i.e. the government, were manipulating the weather and
Only because
seeding...
Marjorie Taylor Greene had tweeted it.
Right, okay. Well, these tweets fall on fertile ground when it comes to Trump ones. Scott, I hope you can hear some of this, but we'll play it anyway. Here we go.
What do you think happened with the hurricanes?
I think there was an upcoming storm, and then I think government set in with whatever it is that they do. I don't know all the specifics about it. I'm not an expert in cloud seeding or whatever it is that they use to magnify the storm to a higher degree to disturb a land that maybe wanted for lithium that Harris's husband is partaking in.
It just goes on and on.
She needs some lithium.
Yeah, with this stupid woman.
This is Marjorie Taylor Greene, is it?
Well,
No. This was just a member of the crowd.
She's just a member of the Trump crowd, hypothesising that it was a government plot to whip up a bigger hurricane because that would somehow be bad.
It was going to punish the Republican voters.
Yes.
That was the argument.
Because this weather system was hitting a Republican state, yes.
Well, it was also Republican areas in a Republican state.
Yes. So...
Are you into musical theatre at all?
I liked the Book of Mormon.
Okay. Well, I'm going to suggest you look up Randy Rainbow.
Right.
Who is a theatre kid. He's very camp, and he basically takes news clips of whichever mad Republican is being interviewed and then puts him interviewing them instead, and then breaks into a song based on generally mad Republicans. It's quite funny. He's been around for about 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
But worth a listen to.
Randy who?
Randy Rainbow.
Randy Rainbow. There you go, dear listener. Look for that one. So all right. Well, gentlemen, that's an hour. I've still got an enormous amount of stuff to get through on this agenda at some stage. But with a bit of luck, I'm really tempted to run that letter from the Australian Christian Lobby and give it to Notebook LM and see what it comes up with. If you've been watching the show but you don't then bother with the audio version, just check it out in case I manage to put it in for a bit of fun. So, all right, dear listener, thank you for your attention. Thank you to the patrons for your support. I will be back with the guys. You're all around next week? No,
yeah, I am.
Going on?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, very good. Okay, we'll be back next week. Thanks. Talk to you then. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from me.
And it's a good night for him.